Hey, so the FCW story appeared on the WWE network shortly after the Elimination Chamber pay-per-view, and I watched it. And so, as usual, I'm going to do some notes. I'm not going to give you a whole recap, just some things that I found interesting in the documentary. For starters, they talk a lot about Steve Keirn, who was the owner and operator of Florida Championship Wrestling, and they talked about that he he used to wrestle at Championship Wrestling from Florida, the NWA affiliate, and I thought that was interesting. But they gave a very quick bio. Like he wrestled for a long time, and they gave just told people where they would know him from. That he was a member of the Fabulous Ones, and that he was Skinner. I actually forgot that he was Skinner. But the interesting thing about the Skinner is that he said that he was a real alligator hunter, and that's where the Skinner character came from. So that's like really bizarre that he was like a real alligator hunter, and he had an action figure, a Skinner action figure, which is really cool because I didn't know they made Skinner action figures. But he was also the second Doink. So after Matt Bourne got fired, he was Doink after Matt Bourne. So that was interesting. So he after his career ended, he wanted to he Steve Keirn was a producer at the WWE, and I guess this was years after his retirement, and he didn't really get anything out of being a producer, so he wanted to open his own training facility, and he was given a contract by WWE to do it, and he went about creating and operating Florida Championship Wrestling. So he's saying that WWE essentially. Another thing that I found interesting was that WWE did not own the territory. Steve Keirn owned the territory. So he was responsible for everything. WWE just paid the talent to be there. So Steve Keirn didn't have to pay for the talent, but he had to, book the building, promote, do all that sort of stuff. And basically, he just got a stipend from the WWE, a contract to train their performers, the performers that they've signed. And he put together his own team. So Dr. Tom Pritchard, Norman Smiley, Billy Kidman, Joey Mercury. He was the one who officially brought in Dusty Rhodes as the promo teacher. That would go on to be the promo teacher in NXT. And it was fantastic. And this was great. It had a lot of big name talent in the documentary talking about FCW. Sheamus, the Bella Twins, Corey Graves did a lot of talking. Seth Rollins, Charlotte. Basically a lot of the stars that were made within the last 10 years. So, from Heath Slater and Kofi Kingston to Biggie Langston and Naomi, just a lot of different people who came out of FCW. That was usually in the first class of NXT, the first couple of classes of NXT. So Bo Dallas and all those guys. Roman Reigns was another one. Dean Ambrose, who now is John Moxley. All of those guys, and they talked about how the different teachers. Joey Mercury wasn't in this documentary, so I guess this documentary was filmed maybe when he was working for Ring of Honor. So he wasn't in the documentary, but Tom Pritchard was, and they talked about Tom Pritchard's training regimens, and that some of these things sounded really bizarre. Like the man in the middle was sound insane. Where they said it was to be one guy in the middle of the ring and everybody else would be in the corner. It would be constant motion where, the guy in the middle would have to do arm drags on everybody. So they would run in, arm drag, then somebody else from another corner would run in, arm drag. And I thought like, oh, that's crazy. I wish they would have showed it just so people can get the general idea of what it looked like. But that was insane. But it made sense because he was talking about, repetition, that you have to do this until it becomes second nature as far as wrestling is concerned. You have to be able to do things like a body slam or an arm drag until you're not really thinking about it. And I thought that was just that little nugget was really interesting because you do sometimes see performers overthinking things, and especially green performers. Like you watch enough NXT, you can see it with some of the younger, especially the female performers. You can see that they're definitely overthinking their spots. So it's interesting that you see different people, you know, teaching that you have to keep doing this in front of a crowd, and it's really interesting. So they talked a lot about the facility. The facility was essentially just a warehouse where they worked, and it was like they say it was not air conditioned. It was basically a shit building. That kind of reminded me a lot of the old territory system. In the territory system, there was often buildings that were exceptionally hot with no air conditioning, and performers had to do multiple jobs. And FCW was the same way. ECW also talked a lot about this in the ECW documentary. That in ECW you would have wrestlers who would wrestle. They would also sell merchandise or work the hotline, and they would help promote the shows. And FCW was the same way. Like they had the performers doing street team, which is going out and putting up posters and passing out flyers and stuff like that. And they had to put the ring together, take the ring down, transport the ring. It was crazy. And you think like people think that the territories died, but that territory system kind of still existed up until the creation of the Performance Center, and now, which was in like 2014 or something like that. So that kind of territory system still was in place, and it was even in some ways grimier than the territory system, but they had Steve Keirn had the WWE backing them, so it wasn't like an indie promotion. So they talked a lot about promo class, and this was the fun stuff about the documentary was they show all of these famous wrestlers, the before they were superstars, struggling with promos. They had no confidence. There was a lot of ums and uhs and people trailing off, and it was really good. Like it was really great. And then I watched this, and then I watched Raw. So watching Seth Rollins cut a promo on this FCW story, and then he was cutting promos on Raw was interesting. Seeing Daniel Bryan really being really bad at cutting a promo, and then knowing that he's actually really good now shows that the amount of effort that they put into building his confidence and his character, and that's really that shows that this is what development was all about. And a lot of fans they poo-poo the concept of developmental. They think that, well, I'm a champion in Ring of Honor. I shouldn't have to go to developmental. And then you see that these guys legitimately don't know what they're doing. And, they can't cut a promo to save their life. They don't know how to work cameras. And they show you this sort of thing in the developmental system. And it's crazy how often you see these guys come straight from the indies where they don't have to do this stuff. And I think Drew McIntyre might have even said it, like in the indies you don't have to cut promos that often, because you come in, you wrestle, and you leave, but when you're in a promotion for a while, you have to ingratiate yourself to the audience. You have to get people to know who you are, to care about your performances, and it's a completely different mindset. And this was the part where they spent about a good 30 minutes talking about Dusty and Dusty's influence. And that's the type of stuff they talk about all the time, especially in terms of NXT. So I thought it was a little redundant. They talked about, how Dusty helped individual performers. But they also talked about a lot of things. Like they showed the proto Bray Wyatt stuff where I'm not going to use his real name, but when the Bray Wyatt character was first coming into its own, and you could see how he was working his way through it, and it was magic. Like you could look at the Bray Wyatt promos that they showed just in this FCW video, and you could see that there was a lot of talent and potential in the Bray Wyatt character. Like he had it down, man. Like the Bray Wyatt I was seeing in those videos was very similar to the Bray Wyatt I was seeing in 2016, 2017. Not so much, even in 2018, but not so much within the last 2 years, because he's kind of been a little bit more focused and not rambly and storytelling and that sort of thing. But that to me was wonderful. Also got to see a lot of Heath Slater, because Heath Slater was a guy who was kind of brought in as one of those guys in the Nexus who didn't do a lot, who didn't show that much personality, who didn't really do much of anything. And of course, it wasn't until 3MB and he started doing the one man band, baby, that you actually got to see Heath Slater be a personality that we know that he is now. But he had it then, as far as being over the top and being funny and funny looking and stuff like that. They just didn't do it. But, they just didn't use that. But Heath Slater seemed to have been a big part of SCW. He was really proud of it. And that made me smile because he was really, really proud of being a part of this group, even though he wasn't the biggest star that came from it. I think maybe Roman Reigns might have been one of the biggest stars that came from it. And, Roman and Rollins and Ambrose and Charlotte and Sasha Banks and Bayley. But, they were probably the biggest stars that came from it. But Heath Slater seemed to be the most proud. And he seemed to have had the most fun, And I really enjoyed his portions of the documentary. I thought they were really good. And I think they showed a lot. It actually showed how long Heath Slater had been around, too. He's been under the WWE umbrella since 2007 or something like that. So he's been there for a long time. And a lot of these people have been. A lot of these, like the Bella Twins and, Big E. And, these guys have been under contract in one way or another, either in developmental or in an actual brand for upwards of 10 years already. And that's insane. Like, I didn't really realize how long Baron Corbin had been around. But Baron Corbin was in FCW. And I know he didn't really start making an impact on NXT until much later after the initial NXT. And, but he was even there then. So, like, that was really interesting. So, they showed some pretty hilarious pictures. Some pretty silly pictures that they showed that these guys were taking because they were trying to promote the performers, and they would do things like take these pictures and put them in brochures and make posters and stuff like that. And that was pretty funny. And then he talked about FCW is essentially the Proto NXT. That it was the place where referees were trained, cameramen, announcers, producers, people would go down to FCW to get their legs up under them. And it was exactly how NXT is now, except for on a different stage, on a much lower stage, because they didn't put as much money into it as they do now. So that was interesting as hell too. So they also talked about the system of call-ups. There was a lot of, now this is the part where a lot of people online were saying, like, this is the part of the story where you would get that they're talking directly to the people who are in NXT right now that maybe haven't made it to the main roster yet, or haven't made a lot of time on NXT TV. That they were saying, like, there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to why people would get called up. Because they said, sometimes a guy will come to NXT, to FCW, Florida Championship Wrestling. They would be there for 2 weeks or a month or something like that. Then they would be on TV. And there was some bitterness. And they showed this Seth Rollins promo where he was kind of bitter about still being in FCW. Seth Rollins is a dick, by the way. Like, he seemed to have been kind of dickish in the documentary. And he was like, dickish in WWE did a Shield documentary a couple of years back. Seth Rollins was a dick in that documentary too. He just seems to have a better than you attitude about a lot of this stuff, and you could see it in a lot of the talking points that he was going through. Like, he was talking about being an FCW and having a certain pedigree and being better than quote unquote bodybuilders and football players and stuff like that, because he was the Ring of Honor World Champion, and so he was had been doing this for a while, and he kind of had rested on that, and he kind of had a sense of entitlement that came with that. But they kind of went over that again, that he was getting a lot of heat for having a bad attitude in FCW, but he's a complete douche. But that ties into the whole, nobody had an understanding of why they were calling up certain people. And it seemed to me that that would be frustrating. But if they're casting kind of like a movie where they would say, well, we need this, so we're bringing this in. Corey Graves used this great analogy where he said it's like the machine that the game where you would have the claw and it would scroll over the top and then it would dip down and pick somebody up and then carry them out. And then he would say, oh, like, like it seemed almost at random where somebody would be there one day, then the next day they wouldn't be. And then, Heath Slater talked about when they got picked, where him and the eight other talents got picked to do the first season of NXT, which was the game show version of NXT. So I think it was Heath Slater and Wade Barrett and Daniel Bryan and all those guys. And they were told they were getting called up, but they weren't told to do the game show NXT, but they weren't told who the pros would be and all that stuff. They was just told they were going to be called up and to be prepared. And that, but it was really interesting, and this all was the brainchild of Johnny Ace, by the way. I forgot to mention that earlier, but they talked about this, that Johnny Ace closed or pulled the contracts for Ohio Valley Wrestling, and what was the other one called? HWA, Heartland Wrestling Association, I think it was. And he pulled those contracts to give them to Kern to run Florida Championship Wrestling. And it all kind of became full circle because Triple H, when he took over, he pulled the FCW contracts and just decided to create the Performance Center and do NXT. So that was kind of the death of FCW. And Steve Kern was offered a job to come over to NXT, but he didn't want to move, even though it's still in Florida, because everything is run out of Orlando, but he wanted to live in Tampa, so he didn't just want to come over, which is really weird. But, he kind of stepped away from it. And this is also one of the parts where it seemed like they were talking directly to the people who are in NXT right now, who might be kind of grumbly about not getting on TV or not being paid and all those sorts of things. That there were a lot of people who were talking about that too. Like Sheamus would say, like, I think Corey Graves also said it, like, you worked for WWE, but you're not getting paid like it. You're not getting paid the same as somebody else who was also working for WWE. And you're also not working in the same buildings. You're doing, in some cases, more work in a less comfortable facility. And then they also kind of talked about the Performance Center now as a sort of, you need to appreciate what you have now as far as the Performance Center is concerned, because it's completely different than what we had to go through in FCW. And I kind of like that, It's of course meat to the dirt sheets and stuff like that, because they're constantly talking about people being upset in NXT. But it's like, well, who cares if you're upset? People are upset at their job all the time. Who gives a shit? So, but that was really interesting. It was a really interesting documentary, and it was really fun. I loved it. I really suggest other people watch it. I will probably watch it again just to pick out some of the tidbits that I didn't catch before. But it was really fun. They talked about a lot of hilarious promos from performers that never made TV. So they showed some clips of some guys I've never heard of that would do silly things like repeat themselves in their promos, or they would cut these really bad promos so they were funny, or they were sometimes, but it's hard to watch this and then say, it's hard to watch this and not have an appreciation for everybody that went through it, from Sasha Banks and Sheamus to Drew McIntyre. And that was another thing, that this documentary is coming out right on the heels of WrestleMania being in Tampa. So I think they said that this the old FCW building, which is now like a bounce house for children or something like that, it's like 15 minutes away from where WrestleMania is actually going to be held. So Drew McIntyre went from being FCW champion that now he's going to wrestle Brock Lesnar for the WWE title 15 minutes away in the main event of WrestleMania. And I was like, man, that's poetic. That's an incredible note to end on. And I'm going to end there too. So what did you think? Did you like the documentary? Did you watch it? If you didn't watch it, you probably should find some way to watch it. And if you did watch it, what did you think about it? Like this video. Please like the video. Please share the video. And leave a comment. Thank you.